Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to the podcast, Let's Talk Stories. I am one of your co-hosts, Jared Moses, as well as here with Jalen and Charles,
Hello, hello, hello.
our wonderful team here at the company. And today we are doing this podcast is known as Let's Talk Stories, the podcast where we use uh, pop culture mediums or pop culture art to teach lessons about story mechanics and uh, life lessons, I guess. And today we are talking about the concept album by Lin. Is it Lin? It's Lin-Manuel
Lin-Manuel
Miranda.
Miranda. Jared.
Yes. Who, for those who don't know and are not familiar with him, living under a rock, is the creator of Hamilton, as well as the songwriter for movies like Moana and a bunch of other stuff.
In the Heights.
In the Heights. Which in the Heights, which I have not seen yet, but I do want to see it.
I low-key also cried to Encanto this week, so...
Oh, yeah, that too.
I knew there was another movie there. He's also doing the Mufasa score, which I'm not interested in that movie, but I am waiting for the album, because I'm like, yes, I can definitely listen to this song.
That he will not produce anything less than a masterpiece in whatever he does.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Charles, how dare you? That you have no interest
I don't care. because you know me, I've said my piece on. I don't have to defend myself in the slightest.
But today we are talking about the Warriors concept album, and it's based off of the. Originally, I thought it was going to be based off of the book, and then I found out, oh no, it's based off of the movie, the 1979 movie, which is based off the book. And so, and it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about stories. We're going to talk about our thoughts about it, and so on and so forth. I'm also probably going to be the one to point out the major differences of the book, movie, and concept album. I will be that nerd and do that.
Some of that for me, because I did have a few things that was like, we have to talk about this.
So let's jump in first. I'd like to, before we jump into the actual conversation of the Warriors, what I'd love to do first is we just want to kick off with what you guys have been watching and consuming or listening to or reading this week. So I'm going to kick it over to Jalen. Ladies first, what have you been entertaining yourself with this week?
I think I already gave it away. After listening to the Warriors, the entire 120-minute long album, maybe like 5 times this week. I also went on a kick rewatching all the other masterpieces that Lin-Manuel Miranda has made, and Encanto was one that I cried to.
Crying is a good sign. What about you, Charles?
I'm still, my current reading list is I'm rereading, and so I can finish the Fables comic from Vertigo Comics. I'm reading The Son of Neptune, which is the book 2 of series 2 of the Percy Jackson series, and I'm reading the 3rd Honor Harrington book. I'm listening to that audiobook, but I'm reading the 3rd Honor Harrington book, The Short Victorious War by David Weber. All 3 are really good. But this week, mostly I had to show my family Transformers 1, so I got a Paramount, which they loved. Me and my brother did, but a Paramount Plus subscription to do that. So I got to return to Star Trek. Thank God. So I finally, because I'd known of its reputation and I had seen an episode and like bits and pieces here and there, but I never, for some reason, as a Trekkie, never was able to watch DS9. So I watched Deep Space Nine. And so I watched the pilot for that, and I watched the famous episode Far Beyond the Stars. I'm like, Star Trek is the best thing in the world. So I finally, because I haven't been able to, once Paramount Plus like took it off of BBC America and Netflix and all this stuff, I haven't been able to watch Star Trek, and it's been so painful. And now I'm like, oh, I'm over the moon about that. I also on the Paramount Plus saw the SpongeBob musical recording, which was really good, by the way. I was really surprised by how good that was. I was like, this is really good. So, there you go, everyone. He just named like a bunch of crazy differing things. I make
It's
no
been a
apologies.
good week. It has been a good week.
For me, I have been all over the place myself, but mine's has all been television and movies. So I started with Supernatural, trying to get through that. I've seen it before, but I've always fallen asleep on it at different parts. So it's kind of been like, I want to watch this from beginning to end. And so I'm on season 4.
But
now.
are you watching the anime?
I have seen the anime. I did enjoy the anime.
During that one.
But I fell asleep on a lot of Supernatural this go round as well. So I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that it just bores me. So I was doing that. Then I switched to Friends for a while. And I had avoided Friends for a really long. I've seen Friends before, but I've avoided it for a really long time because out of protest, purely because I'm a firm believer that
Oh yeah, you've told me this. Yeah.
Living Color is I believe it's Living Color should be the rightful thing that Friends currently is, because everything that Friends has become came from Living Color. But that's besides the point. Then it was just all about movies. So yesterday I watched We Live in Time, which is the new Andrew Garfield movie with Florence Pugh, or whatever her name is, which was fantastic, and it's sad. It made me cry. But it was fantastic and sad. And then, yeah, and now today specifically, I started watching season 2 of League of Legends Arcane, because I heard it is a masterpiece from front to back. So I have to see it to believe it. And Haley Stansfield is amazing in everything that I've seen her do so far. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. So jumping to let's talk about the concept album. First of all, before we jump into the fine details, what were you guys' thoughts about it?
In general?
In general.
I thought it was awesome.
Incredible.
I thought it was awesome. Like, because I had known someone in high school had told me about this movie. So all I knew, this is what I knew about it. I knew Warriors come out to play. Everyone's heard about that. That's in, if anyone's familiar with Bob's Burgers, the Halloween episode where they go to the rich people island, they make that reference. So I knew the phrase, and someone had introduced me of like, it's a famous bad movie, but it's actually pretty good, and that's all I knew about it. And I knew it was going to be an all-lady central cast from like the interviews that Miranda was doing, but otherwise I had no idea what it was going into it. But I was engaged. It's the theater of the mind, with these kinds of albums. But it's great, dude. I thought it was great. It got me to react. I was like, oh no, oh my gosh, or this and that. It's great.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
What about you, Trevor? What do you think?
Same. I was blown away, like actually speechless. I had no words to express how moved I was by the concept, and even more so because I went into it not knowing anything except that it was written by Lin-Manuel Miranda. So I was like, well, it's gonna be good. But after I had looked up the original movie and seen the different changes that had made, the history, what the original movie meant for the change that it brought about, really the first of its kind to tell a story from the perspective of the underprivileged groups that usually in media were just presented as a social problem. And I think that the way it was remade to be that, but for a new generation, was just beyond masterful.
I agree with that. I will say that it took me a few tries to like it. So I listened to it the first time, and I didn't hate it. It wasn't like I didn't think, oh, this is terrible. It wasn't like that. It was more like, okay, this is cool. It's cool. I think my first instinct was, this is not Hamilton, so I don't like it. And then it was like, okay, let me go back into it and let me like really, really listen to be fair, the first listen through, I was also listening to it while I was doing other things, like while I was like doing house chores and things like that. So my brain was kind of halfway in, halfway out, and I wasn't able to fully appreciate it. When I did sit down with it and listen to it all the way through, I loved it. I was like, okay, this is great. This is fantastic. I loved the gender swap. I love the gender swap for lots of reasons, and we'll get into that. But I also really, really liked the fact that, because I had not seen the movie. I saw the movie when I was, now that I think about it, kind of fucked up, but I saw the movie for the first time in school. And I remember being so bored about the movie. I was like, this is so stupid. This is dumb. This is the worst thing ever. And then later on in my life, I saw it. And then, yes, I watched it again this weekend just to sort of see if I could remember. And I was like, oh, this movie actually was pretty good. I could see why it became like a cult classic type of thing. But yeah, the idea was like, and then I was also remember they made us read the book in school, which I don't know why they made us read that book in school, because it is not bad in the sense of quality. It's just bad in the sense of like, why would you share this with children? Type of thing. Because I remember we were in middle school when we read that book. We weren't like in high school. It wasn't anything like that. Trigger warning for anybody that's listening to this. There is a lot of stuff that happens in that book that we will talk about. But specifically the fact that like I had forgotten that like the Warriors wasn't the name of the gang until the movie. That in the book they were the Dominators. And they were and it was just a very crazy thing. And I also love the idea that the movie kind of made them more heroic. Not heroic, but it gave them more of an underdog feel to them, like, oh, these guys are being framed for this crime, and like they're trying to get back home, and it's against the system type of thing. In the book, though, it's more like this is just a gang, and they're just shitty people trying to get back home. It's like they actually had
so many books like that, man.
Yeah,
like the movies, like let's make them decent people, and the books are just like everyone's the worst.
Exactly. And it was like, I also like that the concept album as well as the movie connected the Warriors to the actual death of the Catalyst character, unlike the book, because in the book they weren't connected to it. It was just like the main character, the character that was like, let's come together, let's rise up against the man, was the cop showed up, and then it was like, you brought the cops here, and so they collectively killed this dude, and then in the chaos the Dominators got lost where they were, and they had to try to go back home. But this one, it sort of made sense, which I think is important in all stories, is learning how to connect those wires. But my overall opinion, is that I did enjoy it. But let's talk about, the first thing I want to talk about is, how do you open a story, and how do you open a story well? With that, the song "Survive the Night" is our opening song in this thing. And I want to know you guys' thoughts on, how do you feel the stage was set for this story?
That's an interesting conversation, because so first of all, I looked it up. Apparently the different singers who are various hip-hop folk, I think most of them come from like Wu-Tang, actually. Because I was listening, I was like, wait, I do that voice. I thought that was interesting. Apparently they're different boroughs of New York, which I thought was interesting. So if you listen to it, it's an overture. And I find that really fascinating, because this is a musical thing where you can get away with musicals of having an overture, which is different than an opening number, right? So an opening number is more like, the classic example is like Beauty and the Beast. Better example. Howard Ashman, Alan Menken too, is Little Shop of Horrors, because the Little Shop of Horrors, the first real song of there is Skid Row, which is basically what Ashman Menken would kind of remix for Beauty and the Beast, but that's a different story. But it opens with the title song, Little Shop of Horrors, which is right. That's an overture where like you suck the people in to the world on a music level. It's almost basically like the Star Wars is right. But I thought it was fantastic because what you're getting at in terms of how do you open a story, this is mood. It's pure mood and atmosphere. And then we get to the Warriors, and then we get to, you know, kind of like the plot. But all of that stuff, it's all mood, but it's also, if you'll notice, to answer your question, Jared, there's also seeds, right? So the very title, Survive the Night. So this is what the kind of the goal of it all is. But also, if you'll pick up, there's, you know, Meet the Wrong Cop at Night, right? And that comes in later. So there's a lot of little seeds that get set up. So what I think is this is one way you can open up a story well, which is pure atmosphere and establishing a lot of seeds to pick up, which is what a really good musical would do, which is basically like Stephen Sondheim 101. And there's my Stephen Sondheim for reference for the musical conversation. There you go.
I agree. I really was struck by, and I saw this done in Hamilton too, with the opening number of Hamilton, where pieces of refrains that are sung throughout the song are referenced or sung in the opening number. And well, first of all, it opens with a narrator, and I thought the narrator aspect in this story was really done well because it wasn't overbearing, but having this announcer or this voice announcing what is happening over a loudspeaker to the city is like, it's just a brilliant way to narrate. And and the voice that does this announcing only comes in like 3 times throughout the musical. So it's not overdone, but it's a really great opening to, like you said, set the stage, give the atmosphere, and then this conversation between, you're setting up the stakes where you're introducing the character who wants to make a change, and you have this almost an argument between the leader of the Warriors and the rest of the gang, where they're saying they're debating the stakes of, do they go, do they not? And again, that foreshadowing of like, these are the stakes, these are the problems we might run into. It immediately gets your listener hooked because we want to know, are they going to overcome these challenges throughout the rest of the musical? And yeah, that foreshadowing, the use of the narrator, and the atmosphere was done so well.
I'd also add to that too, really quick, to say about the narrator. I forgot the narrator, Jalen. Here's a really good point too. The narrator really reminded me of the very classic Homer, you know, sing to me, O Muse, the wrath of Achilles kind of a thing, which I bring up not in a pretentious way, but in a really good point of saying, you can use tricks to open your story that are thousands of years old, and they'll work. You know, you don't have to do what the latest Paramount action movie that you'll forget about in 2 hours does. You can do the old tricks too. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but they are possible and they can still work.
I agree with that completely, and I agree with you guys. I love the boroughs being alive. It very much reminded me of what's her name? I want to say N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became book, where it talks about how each these parts of New York come alive. I love the fact that Lin-Manuel Miranda used the rappers from the actual boroughs. So everybody that rapped, they were from the borough that they were representing. So you had like Nas, you had Busta Rhymes, you had Ghostface Killah, and what's his name? I forget the guy's name. But you had these different people who you had Cameron from Manhattan, and each of these people represented their borough, which I thought was really cool. As well as I did also like that narrator, simply because I loved how it was basically almost a harkening back to the movie, where they have the DJ who in the movie, when she's delivering the message to the warriors, she's only mentioned, like, she's only spoken of, I think, or she only speaks like, I think, 2 or 3 times in the whole movie. So I feel like it was they captured that perfectly in this. I think it's also important when you are writing stories to think about this. So think about how you want to set up your opening image. The way that the first time that we are introduced to your story, sometimes it's going to have the protagonist in it. In this particular case, it didn't really introduce our protagonist. It introduced the idea of what the protagonist might be, and that's totally fine. But making sure that we understand, allowing your opening image to do all the heavy lifting of explaining to you what the tone is, what the genre is, what the setting is. And I feel like with Survive the Night, you really get a feel of all of that. You know exactly what kind of city we live in. We know exactly what kind of place, what kind of people live in this place, who are, who the enemies might be, and the kind of environment that you're in. So I think Survive the Night opened it up perfectly, and I think it was followed up even better with Roll Call, with the whole just introducing the actual protagonist. And the way that it transitioned into that song, I thought it was so interesting because I had to listen to it 3 times to realize that was 2 different songs. Because at first I thought it was just like one giant long song, and then the Roll Call was just like the ending of it. But it was like, no, it was like a seamless connection. But it makes me wonder you guys' thoughts on protagonist introductions, and what is there anything that you absolutely loved about the way the protagonists were introduced in this particular concept album, or do you think that it could have been done better? How do you guys feel about the introduction, and what do you consider the best decisions, or not even best decisions, what are like your best tips for introducing a protagonist, or protagonists in this case?
That's a tricky one, because this is one of those things where, I mean, like you alluded to, there's not really a right or a wrong way to do it, because there's so many options. In general, I feel like it's said to introduce your character like in their present state of being. So like you say, this is normal, and then later down the line, you're going to say, your conflict happens, and suddenly they're thrust into these series of adventures that they have to overcome. I think that it was done well in this musical, but I really appreciate when I first meet a protagonist and they are in a moment of tension, and you get to see how they react in a moment of tension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to that end, again, a musical, you're dealing with a very couple of different rules where literally you can have the characters go, this is me, this is who I am, right? But to that end, like Jalen said, there's not really a right or wrong way, but I will say in terms for me is 2 things. Thing number 1, thing I can't stand, I don't like when characters come up and you just tune out their dialogue because you just know the writers, filmmakers, whichever medium you're working with, have the characters come up and go, I'm the quirky one, I'm the science one. It's like a terrible Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles opening song. You know what I mean?
You can do that well if you're spinning it to be a comedy.
Yeah, there's a way to do it, but to that end, I think the way to do it is you can't say this character fills this position, and it has to be this character is like this because they're a person, so they're not specifically one thing. So, for example, going back to like TMNT, everyone knows like Mikey's the funny one, but that's not the entirety of Mikey. So when he has a trait, he doesn't fill in the place, or at least that's how it should be. But I was going to say the other factor is it's really, really, okay, this is going to sound really, really terrible, so bear with me here. It's really easy to get an audience hooked on a subject, on a character, which is not to say it's easily done. But if you can just give the audience a little bit of a bait, that's all you need, right? Mm-hmm. So with the second song, the Warriors, all I have to know is they're together. They are happy together. They got their shtick. They run Coney Island. They are clearly ruffians and they have codes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all I need. I don't need to know their whole backstory. I don't need to know the thing. And the other thing too is, and this kind of goes more with like modern Western animated films, they don't need to be quirky. They don't need to be dropping jokes. They don't need to be, I'm so in your face. You just need to give me a little bit, because remember, the audience can find who they're going to be in time. Just like you said, like when they go on the adventures, then we'll find out exactly who they are. So like, for example, Fox in this story starts out as one thing and becomes a whole other thing, but we'll get there when we get there. But, so I think that's something really important, is that you can do it quietly, of just tell us the story and not have to kind of set up like a character profile, if that makes sense, with all those technical details. If you just go, here's the character, here's their traits, we will find out with you. Drag us by the hand if you want, take us on the journey, but you don't need to sit us down. Walk with us, I think, is the advice I would give. Which again, it's very hard, but you know, you can do it. There are other ways.
Yeah. I will say I just looked up the actual lyrics of Roll Call. And it ends with, can we unify all of New York? Can we run the night? And I think that that's a perfect way of wrapping up. You've introduced the tone, the atmosphere, the setting, if you will, and you've introduced your main characters, and you've introduced the stakes. And with this, you're introducing the problem. So right there, you have right off the bat the 3 basic foundations of a story: the atmosphere, the setting, the characters, and the problem.
I can agree with that. I agree with that. I think I agree with that. I think that that's all necessary. I feel like Roll Call did it very, very well. And then it rolls into our inciting incident, or the preparation for the inciting incident, dealing with Cyrus. And Cyrus was played by Lauryn Hill, which I personally adore, because I adore Lauryn Hill, and I always have. I have a friend who we argue all the time over when I tell him that I believe that Lauryn Hill is the greatest female rapper of all time, and he just loses his mind. So because he's not here to defend himself, I'm going to say it's true that she is the greatest rapper of all time. But I think that they did something in this. Cyrus was a catalyst character, right? She represented an ideal and a belief and a hope. And in a story, you oftentimes will have a hero, and that hero will run into this inciting incident, this moment that will change everything from their normal life to their to this new normal. And usually it is at the sacrifice of something or someone. I don't mind it, but I don't love it when that catalyst thing is a person, and the person has to die to set things in motion. I understand why it had to happen in this particular story, and I'm not faulting it as, like, oh, this, it makes it shitty. It's more just something that I always feel like, is there another creative way to make this interesting? This being an adaptation of something that already exists, I understand why they had to go that route. But killing the catalyst character always seems to me like one of those break the glass in case type of situations. But that's my opinion. What do you guys think as far as that goes? Or as far as the whole inciting incident as a whole goes?
I think what you say is interesting. In this particular case, I can't think of a way around it, because I don't know how else you could talk about the theme about the truce between the gangs and the threat of it breaking entirely in the story, as well as why the Warriors would be running around. But I do think your point is interesting, because this is a side topic, but like, I finally rewatched Gladiator, because I feel like I had my own opinion of it, and it's okay. It's okay. Aesthetically incredible. Does Maximus's wife and son have a name? Because he always goes by wife and child, and I was like, what? And actually, for the record, I liked Maximus's character rewatching, but it was like, what? But we're kind of getting into a little bit of revenge rather than a catalyst thing, so that's a little different. But yeah, it's a trick. But the thing about it, again, I didn't know what the story was, so I was listening to the album and I hear the gunshot. I was like, oh no! So I thought it was incredible of just the sense that there's this hope. Like the story starts off in a really hopeful place where and that's what Cyrus's song is about, where it's like we're no longer killing each other, and that idea that we can fist fight. We don't have to stab each other and shoot each other, which has a lot of, if you look up like gang history in the United States, is an interesting conversation for another day in terms of a lot of different things. But I thought that was really incredible of like, wow, this is really good, but something bad is going to happen. It is, and then it does. And it's sad because and the musical carries us over where it's like there's always this hanging in the air. Cyrus has been killed. Is the truce going to last? What are we going to do? And there's a pain to it that fuels them that I thought was really relatable, because no one wanted this to happen. No one wanted this kind of worst case scenario to happen. And living with the worst case scenario, I think, is very, very interesting. And with the Warriors, they have to live with that and the fact that they're blamed for this, which is really incredible. And there's another thing I want to add to that, which is a lot, but I'll save it for 5 seconds.
I will say, when I listened to it and I heard the gunshot, the biggest thing that hit me was the silence after the gunshot.
Mm-hmm.
They really gave you a chance to sit with it, let it echo, and let you come up with, what does this mean? And then I was also impressed just by the sound of what was the name of the song? It was
Derailed was the
yeah. But the way that Cleon saw what happened, and then Luther immediately blamed it on her because she was the only one who could identify who actually shot Cyrus.
Mm-hmm.
That the chaos that audibly starts mounting is exactly what you want to feel when you are at the point of the story that everything needs to be going up in flames, because it's the point of no return. There's nothing else that can be done. It's gonna be chaos, and how are we gonna get through it?
I could see that. I could see that. I think I agree with that. I agree, and I agree with what you're saying, Charles. I understand where you're coming from too, with the whole it's hard to see a way around it. See around using it, and like I said, I wouldn't say, oh, they shouldn't have done it, because I feel like if they didn't do that, the whole story itself there's no way to change that without fundamentally changing the entire story. So I totally understand it from this particular story's perspective. My thought process is simply just, I just don't know if I like it. I think it goes back to like when I was a kid and I used to like always try to come up with like superheroes for comic books and stuff like that. And like when you start thinking about the origin story, the inciting incident of not every single superhero, but a lot of superheroes is always somebody they love died. Constantly trying to figure that out always made me feel like whenever someone was like, well, can you make a superhero? Can you make a hero where someone they love doesn't have to die or get kidnapped? Is there any way to do that and still be interesting? And I think I struggled with doing it for so long that once I figured out a way to do it and it be, interesting or fun, I kind of just saw it as kind of like a lazy way to make it happen after this point. But again, with this particular story, I think it's relevant and there is always a place for it. So if you were currently writing a story where in the inciting incident, the protagonist's mother or friend or sister dies or something like that, don't be discouraged or don't think that it's like, oh, this is the shittiest way and your story's trash now. But it's more that there is, I think there are other ways of doing it, and if you can find one, do it. If it works for your story, use it. I think that's the most important part. I think that's going to be the key reoccurring theme through every single episode that we have, is always going to be, if it works for your story, use it. But you did mention,
if you have a point, do
Right.
it. Even if
Right.
the point, to quote Black Panther, is "Nah, I'm just feeling it," you know. Do it. But you have to be able to tell me that "Nah, I'm just feeling it," and I just wanted it. That's fine.
Yeah, but don't do it to check off a box. I think that a lot of times happens when it comes to structural storytelling, formulaic storytelling, is we do a lot of stuff to check off the box. Obligatory death, obligatory love interest. It's like, and then you just have this kind of paint by numbers story, and it's no good. It has to be based on where your story's at. But you did mention Luther, Jalen, and that made me want to talk about villains. I hated Luther. I hated Luther's songs. I liked Luther in general.
Yes.
I hated his songs. But
Okay, I legitimately at the this is like skipping way ahead to one of the last songs, but when he rolls up in the hearse, he's like, "Warriors, come out to play." I literally got the shivers. I was like, "No, I can't."
I see. Okay, so I understand why the metal, the heavy metal, it wasn't really screamo, but I mean the hard rock approach and the chaotic nature of the music was necessary, because it coexisted with his character, as he is this. In essence, Luther was the Dark Knight Joker of this story, because it was literally his plan to watch the world burn. That was literally his plan. So
just for fun, he says,
right, exactly,
because he enjoyed it.
And so I get that the music itself was to be representative of that chaotic nature. I still hated it, but I got it. I understood why.
I think that you're supposed to hate it because you're supposed to hate his character.
Okay.
So that is another interesting way of looking at it, where, in music you have a lot of different tools to convey what you want your listeners to be thinking.
Mhm.
And in this case, I think I thought it was interesting throughout, where the character of Luther used a lot of lighthearted verbiage, like, "I'm having a good time playing a game, come out to play," but the way that it's said is very menacing.
Mhm.
So it's a way of showing you the duality of his psychosis, pretty much, where he thinks he's having fun, but as a decent human, you're supposed to hate him.
That's fair.
The songs are legit, and I don't know what you're talking about. That was amazing to hear Miranda, who's mainly doing Broadway numbers and hip hop musicals, do with his co-composer, whose name escapes me. You'll have to tell me, Jalen. I'm sure you can look it up. Doing heavy metal, which I think is different and really neat and awesome. Yeah, and I thought what was really, really fascinating too with Luther is I was listening to him, was like, okay, someone clearly set the word up. Who is it? Why would they kill Cyrus anyway? And having just a force that just does it to do it is very, very fascinating, because I think if it was a rival gang or some conspiracy thing, it becomes like a mystery noir story, So the Warriors are trying to get back from Uptown, to Coney Island, trying to get back to their turf, and we have to solve a mystery. We gotta solve a mystery, right? So it's an interesting point that the musical comes out and says, okay, we're not doing that. Luther's just a bad guy, pure evil, a storm, a wrench in this cog of a machine, right? So we don't have to worry about a mystery, which is an interesting structure, because then you get to focus on the chase, the hunt, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think another factor of it is too, something to keep in mind for writing, is the fact that Luther also represents just the craziness of life. where like, the people that killed, John Lennon, and if you want to really stretch it to George Harrison, but that's a different Beatles conversation for another day, are crazy. These people are crazy, and they're just crazy. People will come in and they'll ruin everything, or crazy events, or insanity. We're getting into the brief wondrous life of Oscar Wilde here, but that's again different conversation. But crazy stuff will just come and hit you out of nowhere, and you have to deal with it. And one of those things is you thought the truce is secure. Let's see what happens when we take the truce away. And so, why would the truce go away? Because of crazy stuff. So I think an interesting conversation about Luther is on villains. Consider not what your villain says, but consider how your villain can complement what you're having a discussion on. And sometimes the villain could just be, again, crazy to be crazy. Like we don't have to really, well, I mean, you could, but you don't have to really break down Ursula from The Little Mermaid of like, what is the deeper meaning of her? And again, you could. That's not inherently bad. And honestly, I think when you're trying to develop something, I think maybe you, the writer, have to really think about that stuff, even if it doesn't come out in your text, your piece. But also consider what can your villain do to continue the main conversation that you're having. Is what I really took away from Luther. And also the songs are awesome, and heavy metal is awesome, as well as hip hop and all the genres. Yes, even country has to be a particular style, but yes, even country. I'm just full of controversies today.
I wasn't saying it was bad. I'm just saying it could be.
No.
Yeah,
No.
I'm teasing.
I was saying it was bad.
It's not you, Jalen. It's him.
He is the problem.
I am. I'm problematic. Listen, I hate heavy metal in general. So I think that may be why as well. It's not my cup of tea as far as music goes. So that might be why. The other thing that I really thought was interesting, and this is Jalen has been, and as well as Charles as well, have both edited works that I've created. But Jalen specifically has had a longer history of doing so. And one of the things that she knows about me is that when it comes, I like villains. I like writing villains. I enjoy writing villains because I think I love making my villains relatable and understandable and having real motivations. But I think that one of the most interesting and most chilling villains are the ones that like chaos. Because there is something to be said about a person who has convictions and beliefs and things that they want to achieve and and will not be moved from the thing that they want. And you can find the direct line to what they want. There is something terrifying about that. People that can't be bargained with and they can't be reasoned with because they have a motivation than what they want. But there is something inherently even more terrifying than a person who doesn't have that, who no, you can't reason with them, no, you can't bargain with them, but they also have no clear motivation. And you don't know why they're doing it. They're just doing it because it's fun. And that's kind of scary. And I think it's really scary because in society, when horrible things happen, right, the first thing we want to do, if somebody shoots up a grocery store or somebody blows something up, the number one question we always ask is, why did they do that? What was the motivation? Why did this happen? We always search for meaning. The idea that there is no meaning behind it, it's just a thing that happened. I blew up this building. I shot this person, not because I had a reason, but because it was fun. That is inherently terrifying. And I think your villain should be inherently terrifying. Not always, because in some cases, the villain is the good guy and the hero is kind of the bad guy. But in the situations where it's like good versus evil, I do think your villain should be absolutely terrifying. And I think nothing is more terrifying than chaotic villains.
But they're unpredictable. And
right.
You don't have a clear path of how your protagonists are going to fight them because they are so unpredictable. For sure. And so that brings me to back to our protagonist. My question for you guys, there was a gender swap in this entire thing. Now, I want to talk about this gender swap because I think it's important. I think it's important for a lot of reasons. I like to think that Lin-Manuel Miranda decided to do this for these reasons. He may not have, but
in the world that we live in currently, where you have all of these people who tend to get a little bit out of shape over swapping of genders, swapping of races, all of that kind of thing, I think sometimes the swapping of a gender is very, very important because it sends a very specific message. The fact that they turned the protagonists of this story into women completely changed the themes and the messages behind this entire story. At least to me, at least that's what I thought. But before I go in on all of the little things that I thought about it, I really want to get you guys' thoughts on the gender swap, on the importance that it has on the theme. And do you think it was a good decision to swap it, or do you think it should have been men? And it's okay if you did think it should have been men. It's not a problematic statement to say that. I want to put that out there.
I think for what I can imagine, the goal being the power of this story was proven when, I mean, obviously when the book came out, because it was made into a movie. But it was definitely proven when the movie came out in 1979, because it became such a cult classic. And as we were saying earlier, it was one of the first times that they had presented a group of people. They had told a story about a group of people that had traditionally only been represented and posed as a social problem. And they said, let us tell a story from these people's perspective about what life is like for them, and they can tell you how they want their lives to be better, instead of you imposing how you want to fix the problem of their existence. So the power of story being representation and giving these people a voice, regardless of, if they were uneducated, if they were, poor, if they were living as gang members, you were still giving them a voice to tell a story from their perspective, and it let people relate to them and understand them better. And I think that the power of that story, you can trace the power of story through all of time, but there's certain ones that like you see repeated, and it's always so cool to see such a stark reminder that the power of story never changes regardless of the time period. So you can take a story that did this amazing thing in 1979, you now tell it again in 2024, you have a different generation, but a story that still has the same power of representation, just for a new audience. So I think that to that end, the purpose of this story was achieved very well by the gender swaps. And there were several. There wasn't just one. There were several instances where there was a gender swap. And sometimes, at first, it made me curious, because when we get introduced to the gang, the Busies, at first, my first time listening through it, I had to really read the lyrics to pick up where, like, what was actually happening, because it's a lot going on. But the Busies, originally I had written down in my notes, like, why were they a thing? Like, were they actually necessary to the story arc? But then I realized, like, with the gender swaps, the entire story kind of became a metaphor of everything that women go up against, and different challenges that they can face depending on the experience. And in that sense, like, the Busies made sense, and their run-in with them made sense. So I think that it gave a new power, the same power, but new meaning to the story. And the meaning was very well executed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, like, I have 3 points on this. 2 are not interesting. The third one is. So the thing is, like, I went to plays, but I didn't go to plays until I was in high school and I became a theater kid. Something I always loved about theater, always, is the fact that you can be any skin color and people will just accept it. So I'm Latino, right? And I was in stuff like Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap, right? Which doesn't make a lick of gosh dang sense. If you want to look at the story, it becomes this brown, black-haired guy, brown skin, black-haired guy. Makes no sense. right? But people just accept it. It's just a thing in theater, and that's something I always really, really liked, even as a little kid in theater. That everyone you just bought it. You're like, okay, that's the character, doesn't matter. So for me, gender swap, this, that, it doesn't really. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. Because then we get to listen to Philippa Sue, which, by the way, Philippa Sue is amazing, and like a side tangent here, by the way, on that Paramount Plus thing, right? Because I grew up with Steve from Blue's Clues, right? Because he's like
Yes.
I worship the ground he walks on, right? And there was the Blues Clues movie, right? It's like with all three of the hosts, and I was like, oh, okay, that'd be kind of cool, whatever, right? It wasn't very good, by the way. Steve was amazing, but it wasn't very good in my opinion. But there's this whole subplot, by the way, of this rainbow puppy, which is as visually adorable as you think. She's running with BD Wong, of all people, by the way, as her manager. That's weird, or director. That's weird. Anyway, but they're going through auditions for the little cameos, and Philippa Sue pops up, and I'm like, this is amazing. And this dog says, no, you're not the right talent. And I was like, so. By the way, so the fact that, which actually leads to my second point of the reason why I think the gender swap is really cool, is because, remember, in a male-dominated society, basically every single freaking character is a guy. Every single person's a guy. Guys come first. Guys this. Blah 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 blah. And guess what? It gets boring. Like there's a really interesting. I wish I could find it. I probably could find it. There was an article from 1977. From an author whose name escapes me. I apologize, but he was black and he was gay and he was a sci-fi writer, which is like 3 things you don't want to be in the 70s, but he was like loud and proud, to my understanding. And he wrote a review of the original Star Wars movie when it came out, and he loved it, and he said it was amazing, it was great. But he's like, why do all the rebels look like Midwestern college footballers? And it's an interesting concept, right? And you get into production history and blah, 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 blah. And it's not a problem, but it is an interesting point that it's like, that's usually what you're dealing with. A lot of guys. There's a lot of guys because of marketing reasons and socioeconomic and blah, 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 blah. So the moment you just make the cast women, it becomes way different, way more interesting. And you get different talent, i.e. Philippa Sue gets to be in the part. So that's always kind of been my stance on that. But the third interesting thing, though, right, is so the whole plot of this movie, which, by the way, and I'll get to that in a second, it's incredible, but we'll get to that in a second. What's interesting is the plot is the gang has to run,
Mm-hmm.
fight, run, get down to Coney Island, get back home, right? That's really fantastic as a concept, right, as a premise. So I'll say this point here. I was listening to this. I'm like, dang, this is basically like a Daredevil comic. So by the way, everyone, I'm a huge Daredevil fan. I have like a big collection of Daredevil comics like all my life. So that's a very, very personal character for me. But I was listening, so I'm like, this one makes such a great Daredevil story of trying to just run through this labyrinth of New York at night, by the way, which again, atmosphere tone, and bumping into these guys. And apparently I read somewhere like the movie was very inspired by comic books, which, by the way, friendly reminder, everyone, try different parts of your ingredient list, because you could toss in comic books and toss in soap operas and blah, 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 and see what you get. You'll find some interesting stuff. But that's all really fantastic. But when you make the gang women, there is a whole different level of predatoriness. Like, so you have quiet girls, right? Quiet girls don't make it home. I don't need to say more than that. And it's an interesting point because also it makes you consider, like you said, Jalen, this whole point in a different way. Because when you're chasing a bunch of guys, they're just a bunch of guys. They're a bunch of dudes trying to make it home. But when they're a bunch of gal dudes, then suddenly there's this underlying predatorial concept, which is why I think the song is Sick of Running, right? Becomes a completely different song. It becomes a completely different, and it's a different kind of minority context of, again, the gangs, they're problem children in the 70s, they're step one. Now, 2024, step two, we can expand the concept of minority conversations of who wants to fight and who's sick of running. And so as they go run in this, okay, I'll just say now, this Genndy Tartakovsky. Anyone who's a fan of Samurai Jack, I love Samurai Jack. Genndy Tartakovsky is one of my favorite filmmakers And that's a lot what the story is, of the simplicity, the genius simplicity of going from A to B. Good luck, kids. Get from A to B. You have fun. Sometimes, honestly, audience, that's all you need. You just need something that simple, and you can delve into it. And some of the delve into is they're running and running and running and barely making it. And then they just go, screw this, man. I'll kick your arse. I can't take this anymore. And all of that becomes something so different when you make the main cast ladies, which is fascinating to do, because like you said, it creates a whole different kind of conversation that makes you think differently. So I thought the gender swap was both aesthetically cool and just for the sake of fun, like, because I don't care, but there is a deeper theme to it, because the story of ladies running through the night trying to survive brutal gangs and finally saying screw it, I'm gonna kick some dudes in the balls is fantastic.
I have two off-topic things. One of them being going back to introduction. The plot was plainly said in the very beginning. Survive the night. That was the plot. And again, like you said, Charles, it can be that simple, and it was so fascinating. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. And another thing, can we just all recognize that New York City, it really is the real life urban fantasy dystopian world that like I see it used in so many different art pieces, because it does have such strong atmosphere and such strong history and culture. It really is like a real life urban fantasy and land.
and to that end, by the way, I'd like to throw out there that there is a lot of adventure and struggle in the story, because most of it is they go from train to train and walk, because like it's just a city, right? Alleyways, buildings. What more can you do? And once you've seen your bazillionth superhero movie, you're like, it's just New York, guys. I don't care. But this story, like you said, it creates its whole other world. But you can also relate to it, because technically we could all do the same thing. So yeah, a very good point about like the ordinary can become quite extraordinary when you get a different perspective to the whole thing, which I think is a recurring element of this piece.
And also going back, sorry, I was adding another random thing. Going back to the gender changes, but also kind of expanding it a little. It kind of hit me. One of the parts that I really like laughed at and cheered hard for was the sick of running, like in the park. Ajax said, I'm sick of it. I'm gonna go pick a fight with this dude that's making advances at us. Because screw it. And the line where, you know, he asks, you got a boyfriend? And she says, nah, I was the problem child. And then like 2 lines later, she's kicking his butt. And regardless of the fact that he turned out to be a cop who then arrested her.
She made me very angry, by the way. I hear the chains on the album was like,
we were getting some ass kicking. But the whole idea of the problem children, or those who were called problem childs, being the embodiment of God's justice in our world to people who are just dicks.
Like I said, Daredevil.
Exactly. That part made me laugh, and I really appreciated it. So
I think for me, the gender swap I liked it. At first, my first thought was, oh, this is a necessary girl power story. But then the more and more I thought about it, I heard Quiet Girls, and I started to think, okay, it's more than just that. On top of that, the realization that, before I jump into that, I want to say that I agree with you guys on the journey structure, because I think the journey structures are fantastic for keeping your story simple. We are executing a journey structure in the film that me and Charles are working on. It's a great way to keep. Oh yeah.
I tease. Sorry, that's a Gravity Falls reference. Everyone, sorry, I couldn't resist.
It's a great way to maintain it. You've seen them in movies like Lord of the Rings, Wizard of Oz, Terminator 1. There are tons of movies where it's really just about
Terminator 2 as well.
Yes, Terminator 2 as well. But they are all journey movies, or road trip movies, if you will, in one specific setting, which I think is always cool. But back to the original part about gender swapping, I think that the movie, unfortunately, swapped out race in a lot of ways in the movie, because there were a lot of white people in the Warriors, and in the book they were majority African American and Latino. That's who they were, and then they swapped them out. There were black people, and I don't recall there being any Latino people in the movie, or at least not in the Warriors. But there were like a couple black people, and Cleon was black. And the difference is, in the movie, Cleon dies like pretty quickly, like immediately once the shooting happens and Cyrus dies. They pretty much grab Cleon and like it's kind of hilarious, because it was kind of like a kung fu scene for a second, and I was like, wait a minute, what's happening? But he immediately is like wiped out. But in this one, Cleon is more of like the hostage, almost. Right? The hostage in the situation, and they don't really, if I recall correctly, I didn't see Cleon die in the movie, but you know that he does die. Like it's implied that he's killed. But the whole swapping out of races in the movie and I understand this is 1979. It was a very different time. This was also around the tail end of the blaxploitation films, so black people being in movies wasn't really that abnormal, but it was very rare that you had them leading things, unless you were like Sidney Poitier or like Harry Belafonte. You weren't really leading the charge for films. So when we talk about swapping races, swapping genders, in this particular case, I thought, oh, this is interesting that they chose to do that. Quiet Girls being, the idea of it's speaking about women in our society today, right? But then on top of that, I also felt it was speaking about more than just women. I felt that this entire story was about oppressed groups in general. And being able, and it was about us as a society, us as people being able to speak against a much bigger audience, a much bigger group of people that are consistently trying to keep us down. Women being at the forefront of this conversation, I think, was perfect. I think that the thing that you have to remember when you're writing a story is that as a writer, you can empower your characters but more than just empowering your characters, you can empower your audience. Because when you choose a protagonist, you're not just choosing a person for us to follow. You're choosing someone that we are going to speak to and speak for. You are speaking for a group, which is why I think representation is so important. There was this whole huge thread on my Facebook of this book group where people were like pissed off about diversity in literature, and why they were like, I'm tired of seeing women and I'm tired of seeing black people, and I'm tired of seeing these types of things because they just have to be there. People are checking a box. And nobody seemed to recognize that the idea of putting people in these places is not about, oh, we're trying to force diversity down your throat. We're trying to show you that these are people, these are groups of people that need to be spoken for as well. And when you do choose to create a character, you are choosing to speak for whoever that character represents. Even when you create a character that's, if you create Mork from the planet Zimzom, that person is based off of something and something that inspired you, and you're speaking for that community. And even if you're not trying to, and when, there's this big debate right now about, book talk and things like that, and it not being a political place, but books and literature and stories are inherently political, no matter where you look at them. And you have to choose to have, if you're going to speak, you have to speak with purpose. I think that this particular story speaks with purpose. I think that the women being the representative audience, the representative vehicle that we're using to tell a story, women are inherently oppressed in our society. This is fact. This is not up for debate. And when we recognize this, we recognize that they are that, and then you put them as our underdog. They are trying to get from Uptown to Coney Island. Coney Island is hope. Coney Island is home. Coney Island represents possibility. And so when you put us in this vehicle with these women, you are driving us to this place of hope and possibility. And every obstacle that gets in the way is representative of the obstacles that each and every one of us face every single day. And I think that's perfect representation of, I think that's a perfect reason for doing it the way you did it. You wouldn't feel that way if it was a bunch of white guys trying to get from Uptown to Coney Island, because no offense, but it's just like, you know, a bunch of white guys get wherever they want to go, whenever they want to go there. That's just the way that it is. But you know, put this challenge to it, and it becomes more interesting. So yeah, I think that was fantastic. I think you guys made some great points on that gender swap thing, and I like the way that you guys are looking at it. We're running low on time, so we don't have to go into all the details that I wanted to cover, but there's a few more things that I wanted to ask you guys about. Specifically problematic storytelling. So it is, whether you may not have known this if you didn't read the book, those listening, if you have never read the book is incredibly problematic, but it's problematic for a reason, because in essence, while this story in the way that Lin-Manuel chooses to tell it is more empowering, I feel like the book was more of a commentary on the way things were, which is okay. I think commentaries are great. I think you should have those. I think those should exist. But there's a lot of stuff that's in it that is pretty problematic. For instance, the character Mercy in the movie is very similar to the way that she is in the concept album. So the whole falling in love with Swan, them having their romance, all of that, it's a little bit better in the movie. Honestly, to me, I liked it a little bit better in the movie because
how could you get better than Same Train Home, though? It was so good. Again, this is another like segueing from the gender swaps and the minorities being represented. Same Train Home was just a beautiful song and a beautiful metaphor that we are all humans. And why are we looking at another human, judging them for taking up the space that they're judging? And as the ones who feel judged, why are we slinking back into the shadows and not taking up the space that we take up? Anyway, segue. I had to just appreciate it.
Okay, so the romance between Swan and Mercy in the movie, to me, was more humorous than it is in the concept album. Because in the concept album, it is a natural.
I did this week. That's all.
Right? No. I think it's a natural progression in the concept album. It feels natural. It feels it's an actual beautiful love story of when these two come together. It feels inevitable, right? In the movie, Swan is pretty much like, you are a lady of the night, in my opinion, and I will never trust you, and I will never like you, and there's nothing you can do about that. And this entire time, Mercy's like, yeah, but like, you still like me though, right? And they're like, and it's just like this humorous banter between the two of them until the end, where he's just like, okay, I do like you. I was hard on you. We can escape this thing. It's more funny to me than anything else. I do believe that the relationship in the concept album was far more inevitable, and it felt more satisfying than the movie. But it's just, I don't know. That's how it was. However, in the book, Mercy, I don't believe, has a name. She doesn't have a name, and the things that happen to her in the book are far worse than the movie or this. In the book, she decides to go with the Dominators, and she's like, I can help you get back home. I can help you, whatever. And the Dominators are like, okay, cool. She's also
initiation.
She's also with this.
Yeah,
right. She's also with this other dude, and then so they collectively killed, or I don't know if they kill him, but I guess they beat the shit out of this other dude that she's with. And then she's like, I helped you guys. I'm with you guys. And then they proceed to like gang rape her and then discard her. They don't even take her with them. They just discard her. That's the end of it. That's the end of her part in the story. And I was like, oh, okay. So when I went back and thought about the book, I was like, oh, so I see why they changed that and they gave her an identity and they made her a person, because that was and it's not even it's not the only time that they do something like that in the book. Literally the Dominators are terrible in that book. They're not good people at all. The only good person is the character that I believe Rembrandt is based off of, which is the protagonist of the book, which is Hinton, who is an artist. And at the end of the book, it ends tragically because he's like, he doesn't die or anything. He goes through all this horrible stuff, goes home, and like his mom is like banging this other guy, and he has to take care of this baby and his little brother. And then he goes to bed after surviving this horrible night, right, of people like dying and all this stuff. And he goes to sleep on his fire escape, sucking his thumb, and that's how it ends. And it's like, I was like, okay, yeah, it's incredibly tragic and incredibly sad. But the book itself is. But that being said, the idea of problematic stories. My question to you, I have thoughts on: is it okay to have problematic things in your story, or should you avoid them altogether? Thoughts?
I think it's important to tell true stories, and I think that problematic things happen in life, so therefore they are true stories. That is my opinion about it, but I agree what you were saying, Jared, about when you are telling a story, you are giving your audience a voice. You're giving them the voice of the story. So you need to do it with purpose. If you are using a protagonist who is problematic, you have to make it clear somehow in your tone about them that they are problematic and they are not to be emulated in that way. But I think it is true that no one is perfect. Everyone has their failings. And I think that it's only good storytelling to tell the truth about that.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think it's a lot of case by case scenarios, but I think for me, two things. One, the characters have to be people, period. So I haven't read the book, so I don't know. But based on what you told me, I'm going to presume, again, if Mercy's counterpart, I should say, doesn't have a name, then they're not a character. And it's not fair, It doesn't feel right. It feels like something's missing or twisted, or the writer has come in and churned things.
That is not true, because they are not a real person that this is happening to, and now you're not telling the truth about a problematic situation.
Yeah. And the second point is that I think, without getting super into it, I think the other thing is, if a character, I think a problematic character or a problematic story works in the sense that when you're reading it, watching it, you don't think this is problematic, you think this is dramatic. And what I mean to say is, without getting into the details, and for anyone listening out there, Buffy the Vampire Slayer fans, Buffy fans, you know where I'm going with this, with Spike. Without getting into it, I personally, and again, we can get into very particular details, but personally, I didn't feel what Spike does near the end of that show was real to his character. It felt like they wanted to do something that was there, and look, I'm going to do something really bad. It didn't feel honest to the character. And again, we can get into details. It's a complicated little situation. But what he does near the end of of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it doesn't feel like it's real. It doesn't feel like his character. Versus, I think if he had done something else, if it had made sense, I think it would have been okay. Versus, speaking of problematic characters, Xander, on the other hand, of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I find to be terrible. But one of the reasons why I feel terrible is he never grew up.
Mhm.
Why didn't Xander grow up? Why does he never grow? Well, because he's that kind of character. Well, then you're stupid. Because your story is about growing up. Buffy was about growing up. So why am I dealing with this? That kind of the thing is, I feel like if you're being honest to a character and saying they are a real person, then it won't, I feel it should be dramatic. It will come across as dramatic, not problematic. But again, a tricky situation. But I think, as you said, Jillian, basically, it does come down to having respect. And I believe we were talking about it, Jared, too. You said that too. It's like you have to know what you're saying. It's not about you, is I guess is a point you can solidify that with.
I will say that if you are currently writing a story and there are problematic things in it, and by problematic, I don't need to be graphic about anything, but you understand that something, if you feel like it's something that when people read this, they're going to be like, and I don't care if it's fiction or it's nonfiction, if you're writing a biography. I agree with Charles, I agree with Jalen, I think telling the truth is important. I've written characters who have done terrible, horrendous, horrible things. If it's true to who the character is, then it's fine. I think the other thing that makes sense too is when it comes to writing problematic things, you need to be able to, there's only two rules that I feel that you have. There's only two options, not rules, two options that really matter. Is your character going to be, are they going to be consequenced for the thing that they've done? In the sense of, if, let's say, for instance, you have, taking the Spike example, for instance, Spike does what he does, is he consequenced for the actions that he's taken? I.e., are we telling the reader or the viewer that if you are to do these things in real life, there are actual real world consequences for doing that? Or are they, or is our character learning from the mistake that they've made? This is more in line with the idea of happy endings and sad endings, or tragic endings. Because in a tragic ending, for instance, one of my favorite tragic movies of all time, Scarface, is a great example of the world can be yours, but you choose, if you choose to behave this way, the consequence is you go to jail or you die. That's the consequence, and that's what we learn. It doesn't. The movie doesn't end with Tony Montana with a pile of money and lots of cocaine and, you know, living in a huge mansion and just like living it up. And the lesson is, go out and sell cocaine and you will have a wonderful life. The message is, if you live this life, this is what happens. Or if it's a positive change arc, then the character learns from the mistakes that they've made. They've learned that this problematic behavior. So if you have, for instance, a main character who is a Nazi, for instance, if the end of the story, they recognize that the Nazi ideology is wrong and they are trying to actively do something to change it, then them being a problematic character is fine. You either are going to teach us why we shouldn't do it, or you're going to show us the ability, how to change from thinking this way. If you can't do those two things, then you shouldn't have it in the book. I don't think that having sexual assault or things of that, child molestation, or any of those things for the sake of, I want to prove that my character is the most evil of evil, is a good enough reason to put that kind of content into your story. Or even if you're, like I said, even if it's nonfiction, if you're doing a biography, there's certain stuff you don't need to necessarily include if the whole purpose is just to show this dude was a dick. It's like, there are other ways you could do that without doing that. So I don't think that I think with what Lin-Manuel did was he took out a lot of the problematic stuff. Because like I said, in the books, there were really no consequences for the Dominators, except for the fact that some people died and some people went to jail. But for the most part, that was it. In the movie, Ajax does the exact same thing, except it's a woman that he does it to, and he tries to rape her, and then she turns out to be a cop, and he gets arrested. It wasn't the best scene in the movie, but it was a fantastic scene because the way that he played it was fantastic. Just that whole him pulling the handcuffs off the bench and like telling her to get it off of him and all of that. And then when the cops pull up and they get out of the car and he realizes that she's just not some lunatic chick that has handcuffs in her purse, but she's actually a cop, and he's just like defeated, and like all he can say is, "You guys are wimps, bro." And then that's it. And that's the end of it. And I was like, wow. Awesome. But overall, I think that's fantastic.
I would like to throw out one more thing there, because
Sure.
I keep seeing this in like a lot of things. The violence towards women thing is not really a charming plot device. You can find other things. I know you said that, but it's like, I watch certain things. I'm like, we're going there. All right, we're going there. It's like, well, because the real world. I'm like, you got to get better imagination there, kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that
General statement there.
I don't think we need to
also
automatically. Go ahead.
Sorry, we can also say the gender swap brought equality there too, because if it's a woman committing violence against a man, the consequence was, well, he still turned out to be a cop and arrested you. So
Right, exactly. And I agree with Charles as well. I agree with Jalen, but I agree with you what you're saying there, Charles, too. Is I do think we have to find a better way of, like, honestly, I think it's just because it's socially it's sad that this is the case, but I feel like it's more socially acceptable to beat and abuse women than it is to beat and abuse race. So even though it's still done with race, so you have like, oh, the black guy goes to jail in the movie because and he's not a good dad and all this stupid stereotypical bullshit. But with women, it's like, it's almost like there's this weird just, it's accepted. Oh, he smacked a woman around. Who gives a shit? It's like, oh, he's a bad guy, but like, that just means he's bad. So we could just use her as like a sacrificial lamb to show how bad he is. And I think that like, that is something we have to stop doing. We have to stop thinking, we have to stop using women as a tool to use to show people are bad. And I understand that as a writer, sometimes that may be instinct. It may be instinct, which is, it's a sign you probably need to do some work on yourself. But I understand that it's understandable that it tends to be an instinct because it's in all of the media that we consume. It's a constant thing that we see. So your first instinct is to be like, oh yeah, I'll just have him like sock her in the face, or I'll have him kidnap this person and people will really hate him. And it's like, but think a little bit longer, just a little bit longer. There are other ideas, other options. Plenty of people you can hurt. Don't have to be women. Okay.
It is a classic, like, it shows that someone has a bad character when they're willing to pick on a defenseless human, regardless of gender. That's a classic way of showing that someone's a bully.
For sure.
I will say another pitfall people fall into in including problematic content in their stories is just going for shock factor. People think that in order to get attention, in order for their story to be good, then they have to write something extremely dramatic and shocking.
Absolutely.
But again, there has to be a reason.
Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Okay, so wrapping things up, there's two more things we're going to talk about before we talk about the lessons that we learned, and then we're going to let you guys go. But first, I only bring this one up because both of you have made comments about it, and that's Fox's death.
Oh my gosh, it was so sad.
Oh,
I was so sad.
More tears. Again,
I
another
literally
use
said,
of
what?
silence. I was like, why are you making us sit with this? It is so sad.
I will say that it is way better in the concept album than it is in the movie. Because in the movie, I was so mad about this because I rewatched it this past weekend and I was so mad because nobody knew that Fox died at all. Like, the Mercy was with Fox in the subway. She ran when the cops grabbed Fox, and then Fox gets kicked off into the thing and he gets run over by the train. And so then when Swan asks Mercy about Fox, she's like, he ran. She doesn't know. She says the cops got him. And that's as far as she knows. And none of the other warriors, because they all have been separated at this point, once they come back together, they're all under the impression that he's been arrested. And they never reveal because at the end of the movie, they're just basically going off into the sunset on a beach. So they never really reveal, like, oh, we lost somebody. He actually died. A friend of ours died tonight. But in the concept album, you feel that. You feel when she died. One, the verse that Fox had describing it up to the point when she died, perfect. But just you feel it. It's like, oh, I felt the silence on the train on the way back to Coney Island. That just like, oh man, like we just lost someone. That's that dark night of the soul moment that you get before you break into your third act and you're getting the climax, and we're getting to, it's like, oh no, how do we come back from that? It was felt, and they did such a great job with that. So I'm completely on board with you guys as far as that goes.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought it was a fantastic, again, the challenge of that, of, okay, we got it, we're in Union Square. Oh no, here's the cop, here's the thing. But something else I find, and I thought the way it was sung, the way it was done, the way it was broken up was just really fantastic, of telling the audience what was going through an experience. But something I find really fascinating about that, something you said, Jared, that this reminded me of Sunlight, was when Fox confronts the cop in the beginning. There is a fear, but there becomes an anger of the powerlessness they have. And the reason I bring this up is that, and I have a story point here. It reminds me of the scene suddenly reminds me of the scene in Andor, the Star Wars show, which is like the best thing since sliced bread. So to make a long story short, there's a scene where Cassian, the main character, Cassian Andor, he's walking on this beach, and there are these stormtroopers who are chasing after some like dudes who robbed something, right? And he's just kind of walking, and he steps up, and there's this other stormtrooper, and he goes like, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm just walking here." And the stormtrooper gets more madder and madder and madder at him, and then he gets arrested for nothing. He literally walked a corner, he turned a corner, and he gets arrested. And I remember for like a week, it really got under my skin. It really, really bothered me, and it just really woke up something. And there's a not catastrophic, but there's a personal memory I have about that kind of reminded me of this situation. But the reason I bring that up is that another thing you can use with stuff is personal stuff like that, because because the way it's written, it feels personal, like of that anger, of that sense of hopelessness. And there is an anger in the story about not wanting to be powerless anymore. But that being said, it's brilliant because then it's followed up by the Same Train song, where there's a sense of hope. And there is this hope that with Klingon, because they're like, we can fix this. The truce doesn't have to break. And I find that balance between the anger and hope in the story is kind of all here in this sacrificial moment, and this hope that there's something out of it, that she uses her anger for something better for people that she cares about. So there's a hope and an anger here that, again, really balances this conversation. And then the reason I bring all that up is I think the story is you could dive into how you feel about situations and your personal experience to enhance those moments. Because it's great to talk about anger, but you're a person, you are angry at something. Try that, or you hope for something. Try for that. See what happens when you put again your own perspective on those things, because you're the only one who can give your own perspective. So you automatically have an originality waiting inside you. So yeah, I love this. Is like my favorite bit in the whole musical. It's incredible.
I think that the way that, like you said, they juxtapose the hope and the anger, and they let you sit with the grief, but they walk you through the grief. So in the song "Still Breathing," when Cleon is captured by the Rifts, and they're interrogating her about, did you kill Cyrus? She's like, no, I saw it happen. I was framed. The line in that song is, what do you do when they kill everything you believe in? We can still go and rebuild the world until we reach the peace that Cyrus was seeking. What do you do when they kill everything you believe in? You lean in and give it meaning. And I think that is that was almost a foreshadowing for Fox's death later on in the musical, because that's the entire they're giving you the tools to walk through this.
I like that. I think that brings me to the last point that we will discuss, and then we'll go over our lessons, or our lesson. The theme itself. We talk about hope. The thing that spoke out to me, and here's something for new writers that if you are listening to this and you struggle with this, I want you to know that I myself, to this day, struggle with the concept of theme. Theme seems like a giant word that feels indefinable when it comes to storytelling, because it's always like you'll hear a lot of gurus and a lot of writer people talk about, well, what's the theme? And all they're really saying is, what's the story really about? What is the moral behind, not even the moral, but what's the thing behind all of this? What's the framework of your story? And the thing about theme is that you, as the writer, will come up with your idea of it. It'll be what you were trying to say. But then the good thing about story, being the connective tissue of our civilization, is that everyone will have different interpretations of what the theme will be. For me, the theme of this story was about hope and remaining consistent in your pursuit of an ideal, regardless of what stands in front of you. That was the theme that stood out to me. I like to think of stories in the term of philosophical statements. If you know me and anything about my creative stuff, that's always how I choose to think about it. What is the philosophical statement? What is the thing that is being said? How do you define it by one single philosophical sentence? And for me, I think that's what it is. I think it is this, sometimes we must overcome all odds in order to achieve an ideal. And at least that's my perspective of it. But I'm interested in what you guys thought about the theme. What did you come away with? And whether that be a one-word thing, whether it be a sentence, what was it that you came away from this when it comes to theme?
I would say the phrase that I came away with was the very last line of the song, of the entire musical. This is the sound of something being born. Mm-hmm. The finale, Cleon gets reunited with the rest of the warriors and they finally defeat Luther. And they have this beautiful song about, first of all, mourning and honoring the people who died along the journey. So Fox, and Cyrus, and they mourn those people, they honor them for their sacrifice. And then they look forward to someday in the city, this is what it will be like. And this is the sound of something being born is a line that was used in the very first song too. So this is another note of your theme should be the connective thread throughout your entire story from the very beginning to the very end. And I think it was just done so beautifully. Again, made me cry.
First of all, I want to throw out there that I think, to quote, if there's something Chris Sanders, he's the one of the masterminds behind Lilo and Stitch, which is like the best thing since sliced bread ever, and How to Train Your Dragon 1, and recently The Wild Robot. That's what he's been really kicking around lately. But he said in a interview once, he's like, themes do not get butts into seats. Something positive, again, for writers, that you don't have to give a giant treatise on life. Charlotte Bronte already beat you to it, first of all. Second of all, but you don't have to do that. Just tell the story and stuff will come out. Stuff you will not expect. Stuff you will not expect, period. So just tell the story, find that later. But for me, what I take away from this that I find really powerful, and again, I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive, and I hope this doesn't come across badly, but it's fight together. because all they have to do is just keep on fighting and punching their way through and keep going and going and going. Don't stop, keep fighting, go, go, go. And they find something, but they do it together. So notice in the end, Luther comes at them like a chump alone, and they kick his butt because none of them could have survived without doing this together. None of them could have been without Cleon. They could never have proven anything. Without Fox, without Mercy, you have to come together to survive a place like New York City. So you have to keep fighting, but you have to fight together. You can't do this alone. Which I thought was very, and it's weird because honestly, there's like all this pulp, fighty, comic booky stuff, but it's very, very much more inspiring now that I think about it, than it initially sounds, which is pretty fantastic.
That actually is a perfect segue into the lesson that I took away from it, which was throughout the song. I think there were 3 instances. It was a refrain that was commonly sang throughout the song, where they did the roll call of every gang, every warrior, say your name, sound off, are you here still? And I think there were 2 or 3 times specifically when they sang this refrain that each of the characters or someone else in the Warriors gang would point out the strength of each other. And I think that there is something so beautiful. I am super honored to be a part of this team here because we bring so much diversity to the table, and we each have such different perspectives and different strengths, and they come together so beautifully. And I think that that's a huge lesson to learn as you're going through life. I mean, whatever your endeavor is, but especially when you're trying to build something that's bigger than yourself, like for us, trying to run our own media company that tells stories for people who don't have a voice themselves and amplifies the voice of people who are oppressed. I think that it's so important to recognize the strengths of each other, call them out for each other, and also recognize your own, because that's that's really the key to your power.
That's a beautiful.
As Stephen Sondheim would say, no one is alone, which is Stephen Sondheim's reference number 2. So I did not mean to undermine your point, but it occurred to me, this is, again, musicals here.
I agree.
You underlined it, not undermined it.
I agree. Look at that teamwork. I love it. No, I agree though. I think that I feel the same way. I think that was kind of the lesson that I learned too, was the value of getting yourself a team. To Charles's point about sticking together because it's the only way that you can defeat this thing. It's interesting that that's the ultimate point, that's the ultimate theme in essence from his perspective. It's also it's the lesson our heroes had to learn. It's the ideology that we all need to sort of accept, is that we are stronger together than we are individually. And I think that if you are just starting out in your writing journey, or you've been doing it for a while, the number one lesson I can impart, it's not even writing lesson. It's just learn to surround yourself with people that support your vision, your ideas, and your goals, and work with them towards that thing. And I know that's not always easy. In our situation, we live hundreds of miles apart from each other. And we don't have the ability to just walk out the door and go see each other or go into an office together and connect. We are separated, but together we are trying to get to Coney Island, and we're doing that through this. And I think I personally feel incredibly lucky to have met and worked with these guys, to have said, "Hey guys, this is the idea that I have. Would you be crazy enough to go on this journey with me and try to make it a thing?" And they said yes, and they have done above and beyond Um, for me, they've shown up for me. They've shown up for themselves, and I think that it's important that when you are trying to be a writer, that you find, whether it be an editor, whether it be a coach, whether it be a writing partner, whether it be a beta reader group, whatever it is, find your tribe and make sure that they are showing up for you and you are showing up for them, because no matter if you have that, no matter what you come up with, it's going to be amazing. So that is the lesson that I learned. Charles, what's the lesson you learned? Did you learn a lesson?
Well, I think the theme for me is that lesson there, what I said before about fight together. But I think another one, just because again, I'll do a bonus one here because I feel the theme was my lesson here. Just damn, musicals can do anything. Like they really, really can. And that's not me praising musicals. I mean to say, as a theater, despite being a theater kid, plays would drive me crazy because they always were set in one room, usually a house, and they'd start in medias res, and I'm just like, this is boring. What are you talking about? And in 2015, I found the Hamilton soundtrack. This was before it became big. So I was one of the early ones. And I found a bootleg of the stage recording of the Hunchback of Notre Dame playing from the Disney version on stage. And I was like, oh, you could do anything on stage. You could do anything. And ever since then, it's constantly been proven to me again and again with theater, you can do anything. And so it's like the Warriors, oh, it's kind of this comic booky, pulpy thing. It's going to be a musical concept album. Okay, how does that work? It can be done. You can find a way. It just has to be, find a way to do it. But I think it's incredibly inspiring that you can find so many different kinds of stuff from all over the place, and to keep looking for that, because sometimes you will just, in fact, actually speaking of Chris Sanders' interview, I think in that same interview, he would say sometimes, it'd be like he couldn't figure out what to do with Lilo and Stitch or whatever, and then he'd watch a movie or a trailer, and he'd go, aha, wait a second. It would have nothing to do with Lilo and Stitch, what the production was working on at the time. But it's like, there we go. That's what we can do. So that's another lesson, more of a technical writing thing, creativity. But dang, you could do anything, man. It can be done.
Yes.
Agreed. Okay. Well, before we sign off for our first maiden voyage episode, I'm going to throw out this thing, and I think we might do it going forward. But I'm going to throw out recommendations because I know we talked about what we were watching this week, but what do we recommend other people watch, listen to, or whatever this week? We're gonna go around. So, Jaylin, give us a recommendation of something somebody should check out.
I mean, if you have lived under a rock, even worse than living under a rock, because I live under a rock and I watch. So you don't have an excuse. Watch Hamilton. I believe it is the single greatest piece of art that has come from this century. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Well, again, this could take forever. So I am spitballing here. Back to what I said of what I'm doing this week of Star Trek DS9, the episode Far Beyond the Stars. Has really, really hit me. Jared, that was the quote I sent to you.
Yep.
That's where it came from. It really, really hit me. But I'm looking at my desk here. Always Battlestar Galactica, guys. 2004, Battlestar Galactica. Always. There's your plug. I'll always just recommend Battlestar Galactica. Always.
Okay, for me, my recommendation, and this is for anybody listening, but also for my team, that I recommend that you guys. I don't just recommend it.
We got homework.
It's mandatory.
We got homework.
If you have Netflix, you must watch The Piano Lesson. It's a movie, but it's by August. It's a play. It's based off a play by August Wilson. And it's in the line of one of the movies that Denzel Washington has vowed to he's basically vowed to bring all of August Wilson's plays to screen. August Wilson obviously passed away. So Denzel Washington made his promise that before he finished his career, he would make sure that all of these plays would be able to see the screen. The first one being Fences, and then Big Mama's, I forget what it was, Big Mama's whatever. The one that was with Chadwick Boseman. It was his last movie before he passed away, I believe. But that one, and then there's The Piano Lesson, which is with his son, John David Washington. And it is, I watched it last night, and it will change your life. I promise you, it will change your life, and it is worth watching, because no matter where you come from, no matter what your race, your background, or what century you live in, even though it is about a Black family, you will connect to it. I promise you, there will be something in it that, if you have a relationship with your family in some way, shape, or form, you will connect with it. So that's required watching for my team. It is a recommendation for you guys. So, but yeah. So anyway, that's that. That's our first episode, guys. I feel like we did a great job. Let's give ourselves a round of applause.
Thanks everyone for sticking with us while we nerded out about all this. It was fun.
Exactly. So stay tuned for the next episode. We will be, I don't know what the thing is going to be at this exact moment, but we will be doing things like this, breaking down different pop culture stories to help you become better writers. That's our goal. So thank you for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.